Chapter 5. In the tower, Alyss began her nightly ritual with the lamp, holding it high in one corner of the window, then moving it progressively to the other 3 corners. She did this 5 times, then stopped, setting the lamp on the floor and scanning the dark countryside outside the walls of the castle. She had done this for the past 2 nights, and so far had been disappointed to see no return signal. She clung to the hope that Will would reply, but the hope was getting fainter and fainter with each unsuccessful attempt. Perhaps he was... A light! There it was, off to her left, moving among the trees. For a moment, she felt her excitement surge. Then, just as quickly, it deflated, as she realized that the light was red, and that it was moving along at a fixed height from the ground, alternately fading and flashing as trees obscured it. She recalled that strange lights were often reported among the trees of Grimsdale Wood. Perhaps this was all it was. Then, out to her right, she saw another. This one was yellow, and it moved up and down in a straight line. Then it disappeared for a few seconds, reappearing some distance to the left of its original position, moving up and down. As she watched, it went out again, and the red light reappeared, flitting in and out of sight among the trees. Alyss's heart sank. For a moment she had thought her attempts had been successful. Then she saw it. At a point halfway between the other lights, a bright white light suddenly appeared, and it traced a steady square pattern, just as her own had done, from one corner of the square to another in a steady sequence. Top left, top right, bottom left. Far below, she heard the muted murmur of voices on the battlements as the sentries also saw the lights, and she realized what Will was doing. He knew there was no way he could conceal the light from the guards. And once the news of a flashing white light was reported to Keren, it wouldn't take long for the renegade leader to guess that somebody was signaling. And there was only one person they might be signaling to. So Will had decided to hide his signal lamp among other lights, the sort of lights people expected to see on the fringes of Grimsdale Wood. She smiled to herself. Will was hiding a tree in the forest, as the old saying went. Another light, this one blue, was flashing now. Then the yellow one was back, then the red one, and then the white one in the centre. She set herself to ignore red, blue, and yellow and watch only white. She picked up her own lamp, concealing it behind a stiff piece of old dried-out leather she had found discarded in the bottom of the wardrobe. She centered the light in the window and then flicked the leather back and forth 5 times, sending a series of 5 rapid flashes to the watchers at the edge of the forest. In the code, 5 rapid flashes from the center of the square meant communication had been established. Immediately, the other light replied in kind. 5 rapid flashes, then a pause, then 3 longer flashes, the standard response meaning, "Are you ready to receive a message?" She hurried to the table and seized paper and a graphite chalk. Will would wait, she knew, until she was ready. Back at the window, she raised the lamp in a vertical line, up and down 3 times. The white light outside mirrored the action. In her peripheral vision, she could see the moving coloured lights flashing and winking away. She even realized that another red light had joined the display. But her attention was focused on the white light. It began to flash, and she noted down the letters as Will sent them. The courier's code was a simple but effective system. 24 of the letters of the alphabet were arranged in a grid of 4 numbered lines, 6 letters to a line. To achieve an even grid, the letters Z and W were omitted. S and V would take their place if necessary. This meant that the letter A was represented by the cipher 1-1, being the first line of the grid and the first letter in the line. By the same token, G would be 2-1 and P would be 3-4. The person sending the message would stipulate the line number by holding the lamp in a specific corner of the square. Top left was 1, top right 2, bottom left 3, and bottom right 4. For example, if the signal lamp were moved to the bottom left corner, then back to the center, and flashed twice, the receiver would know it meant third row, second letter, or N. Unlike Will, who had to draw up the grid to compose his message, a fact that Holt would have found highly unsatisfactory, Alyss knew the grid by heart and could note the letters down directly as they were sent. The light flashed out steadily. To the untrained eye, it was just another random flashing light in the forest. But to Alyss, this series of flashes were as easy to read as an open book. She noted them down quickly. She smiled once. Will was not a rapid sender. Any courier would easily beat him. Then she realized that speed was less important than accuracy, and he was probably fiercely intent on his task, the tip of his tongue protruding, as it always did when he was concentrating. The light moved vertically several times, then disappeared, signaling that the message was finished. She seized her own lamp and replied with the same signal, then turned to read what she had scribbled down. She was pretty sure she had read it accurately as it was transmitted, but it paid to make sure. She moved her finger along the letters. They were roughly scribbled and uneven as she had written them with her eyes firmly riveted on the light. Message arrow 10 minutes, clear window, love, Will, Ack. There was no punctuation in the code, of course, but she understood that Will would be firing a message arrow through her window in 10 minutes and was warning her to be clear of the window. The word Ack was a standard code shortcut for acknowledge. The sign-off, love Will, was highly irregular. That sort of personal touch had been frowned on during her training. She smiled once more. You could read the words before her as saying she was to acknowledge the message itself, or the 2-word ending, love Will. Either way, she murmured to herself. Hastily, she picked up her lamp and moved it vertically in the window 3 times. Up, down, up. It was the standard signal for acknowledge. Then she drew the curtain well back from the window and scanned the forest one last time. The coloured lights continued to flash, and now the white light was swinging in an arc. There was no more signalling, she realised. They were just keeping the light show going. Below, on the battlements, the sentries had grown bored with the lights. The murmur of voices she had heard before had died away, as sergeants ordered the men back to their duties. She kissed her fingertips gently and blew a kiss out into the dark night. "Thanks, Will," she said softly. She set the lamp in the center of the windowsill to provide him with an aiming point, then moved to one side to wait for his arrow. Once he had seen Alyss's acknowledgement, Will started to move forward from his position just inside the tree line. As he had done previously, he ghosted from one patch of shadow to the next, blending with the natural movements of the night and becoming part of the landscape. After 5 years of rigorous training under Holt's watchful eye, and with occasional input from Gillen, the Ranger Corps' acknowledged master of concealed movement, he didn't need to think about his actions any longer. They had become instinctive. He had already picked the spot from where he would shoot. He had to be within 100 meters of the castle walls, allowing for the extra distance the arrow would have to travel to reach the top of the tower. There was a slight knoll, crowned by a clump of large bushes, some 90 meters from the wall. The additional few meters of height would be an advantage, as would the broken, shifting shadows formed by the bushes, with their dappled patterning of white snow and dark foliage. He would blend easily into the landscape there, allowing him to stand and aim carefully. He frowned as he thought about that. He would have to aim just above the lamp Alyss had placed in the center of the window. That would mark the gap between the heavy iron bars. It would be the height of bad luck if he got this far and fired his arrow only to have it strike one of the bars and fall to the courtyard below. He wondered if he should have written his message to Alyss in code, but then mentally shrugged away the thought. There hadn't been time to encode a full message, and besides, if the arrow missed its mark and was found, it wouldn't matter if Keren were to read about the stellatite pebble and its properties. It would have already been lost to Alyss anyway. He had, however, encoded the last few lines of the letter, setting up a schedule for further signalling. It would definitely be a problem if that should fall into Keren's hands. If he knew Alyss had a method of signalling, Keren might be able to compel her, under the influence of his mesmerism, to send a signal that would set some kind of trap for Will. The bushes on the small knoll were waist high, and he was able to rest for a few minutes, crouched among them, while he gathered his thoughts and prepared for the shot ahead of him. He looked long and hard at the small, lighted square that was the tower window, with the brighter point at the center bottom that marked the lamp itself. He studied it, judging distances and height, and calculating how his arrow would travel in a long arc to reach the window. He would have to aim high above the point he wanted to hit, but he didn't think about that. When the time came, he would select his elevation instinctively. It would have to be a little higher than normal, he reminded himself, as he was using the takedown recurve bow that Crowley had supplied him with, and it was not quite as powerful as the longbow he had carried for the past 2 years. He set that thought in his mind and knew that his instincts would process it when the time came to shoot. He closed his eyes and in his imagination saw the arcing path of the arrow that would take it high over the walls and into the window at the top of the tower. Holt had often reminded him of an old archery master's dictum. Before you shoot your arrow, see it fly 1,000 times in your mind. Well, he smiled wryly. He didn't have the time for 1,000 imaginary shots tonight. But the saying was an exaggeration in any event. It was simply a reminder to prepare for the shot by setting a successful outcome in his mind. Think of a positive outcome and you will achieve it. Allow doubt to enter your mind and the doubt will become self-fulfilling. He took a few deep breaths, clearing his mind. The conscious preparation was over. Now he would allow his instincts, the result of hundreds of hours of practice and thousands of arrows fired, to take over and produce the shot that he wanted. He rose slowly to his feet. Although at least a dozen pairs of eyes on the castle wall were turned in his direction, not a soul saw him. He drew the message arrow from his quiver and knocked it to the bowstring. The weight and balance were perfect, he knew, as a result of Malcolm's painstaking weighing and measuring back at the house in the forest. The healer was used to dealing in exact weights and measures, and Will knew this arrow would fly like any other arrow in his quiver. He brought his left arm, the bow arm, and, at the same time, began a smooth draw back on the string with his right, continuing to pull back until the tip of his right index finger just touched the corner of his mouth. He felt for the right elevation, sensed that he was a little low, and raised the bow in his sighting picture. If he had been asked at that moment why he made that final adjustment, he would not have been able to answer. It was a matter of empirical feeling, not a calculated action. His vision was fixed on the window high above him, with the arrow now pointing well above the target. There was a slight wind from the left, and he compensated for it, knowing from experience that it would grow stronger the higher the arrow travelled. There were two ways to destroy accuracy, he knew. One was to wait too long and concentrate too hard, so that the muscles of the arms began to tighten and tremble against the tension of the bow. The other was to shoot too quickly, so that the right-hand fingers snatched at the string during the release. The ideal was to find a midpoint, where the action was smooth and continuous, unhurried but not overlong. Then, when he felt the moment was right, when the elevation and windage and draw were all correct, he let the bowstring slip gently from his fingers, with a deep-throated twang, speeding the arrow on its way. The moment he released, he knew the shot was perfect. He saw the arrow briefly as it streaked up into the night, then lost sight of it. Slowly, he lowered the bow, waiting. He saw a momentary flicker of movement against the lit square of the window, but thought that it was more likely that his mind was playing tricks on him, causing him to see it because he wanted to see it. He waited, standing like a statue, his cloak wrapped around him so that he merged into the background. Then he felt a vast surge of relief as the lamp began to move. Up, down, up, down, up, down it went. Message received. Nodding in satisfaction, Will turned and began to make his way back to the tree line. There was nothing more to be done tonight.